stock company Russian Railways. Sergey Galkin, deputy head for Center for Corporate Transport Services for Operational Work, the Russian Railways. Viktor Voronovich, managing director, Federal Freight Company. Bolat Zhardemov, general director of the Limited Liability Company Research Center for Complex of Transport Issues. Yury Sunyaev, general director of the company called LokoTech-Leasing. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, may I pay your attention to the fact that we are going to hear the presentation in English in the end of our session. That's why if you need interpretation, please, you're most welcome to receive the headphones from the desk. We are starting our discussion session about the turnover of carriages, which is perhaps one of the most important issues in terms of forecasting the future of railway cargo operations and the costs, because speeding up or slowing down by just several percent still reflects in excess or deficiency of hundreds of carriages, and correspondingly writes the issue of the balance, or the search for the balance, which we are helping our customers to find, is the key issue. And I'm giving the floor right now to the head of the Directorate for Traffic Management. In particular, Pavel Ivanov is given the floor, head of Central Directorate for Traffic Management at Russian Railways. Thank you. I would like to give you some cases. In this slide, you can see the dynamics of the turnover of carriages starting from 1988 till nowadays. And the parameters, as much as they have changed in this regarding this most important parameter for the success of railway carriage transportation. We can assess the turnover and find it the milestones when we transferred from the fleet with some reserve to operation with less carriages, and knowing the formula of estimating the needed number of carriages, we, by cutting down the reserve, improved the efficiency and reduced costs in turnover. But in 1989, we refused from carriages that were specific to certain lines of business, and the situation changed considerably. The turnover of carriages became as it should have become at that time. As of today, in our fleet, we calculate all the carriages that are running, but also in the idle fleet status, in repair and maintenance, and the working fleet for public or specific use. This next slide allows us to see the increase of the carriages and the reasons behind this were very specific. We can see that during this period the number has nearly doubled, which of course impacts the life cycle. And here is the numbers. This is the slide with numbers of the carriages written off or extracted from operation. So this situation was commented during the previous session, and we can see here the dynamics of how the new carriages were added and older extracted, which of course reflected on the decreasing volumes of cargo carried by these carriages. Here we can see the classical formula. In October 2019, the turnover has increased by 4.3%, and the dynamics of the working fleet has changed as well. The dynamics of the loading and of receiving the loaded wagons, which of course reflects it in the outcomes of this segment. This formula of course includes the wagons per hour in each technological segment. And in this slide we illustrate that the turnover of carriages includes such parameters as the travel time, the speed, and the hours of staying at the technical stations and in the beginning and final destinations. So these are the same numbers or figures that we have seen previously at the slides. And here we can show the dynamics of the Deadhead hall, and we see that this dynamics is not changing over a recent period of time, but we have stepped above 42% compared to 26% in 1988, and this is of course associated with the change of the ownership, and this parameter of course depends on the geography of today's halls. Charcoal goes to the eastern ports, and this is also the factor impacting the routes and the speed and the turnover of carriages and the deadheading of carriages westwards. So the number of deadhead wagons is about 50% from the entire stock. Of course, we all understand how the double operation, as we call it, when we deliver the empty wagons, and this ratio is minimized today, which of course impacts the turnover of carriages. We have decreased it by 16 times. The peak was in 1988. This is about the oncoming haul of empty wagons. We can see that the owner manages the movement of wagons and cars driven by the economic interests, and these interests of course ideally should reflect the interests of the operator, but not always, unfortunately they correspond. And in this slide we can see different situations in which for example metallurgical products are loaded into open wagons, and quite often at the stations at the time when there are some empty wagons, also there are oncoming full wagons, and this is how we can illustrate the same situation and how it reflects on the operation of the entire network. This slide shows the oncoming movement from Yekaterinburg to Voinovka. So there are 468 in one direction, 491 in the opposite direction, and this is the figure. This is the situation typical of one of the main companies that uses this cargo transportation in this route. But in the past, such situations wouldn't have been possible. As for the current situation, yet another parameter can be seen in case of the October turnover of carriages. You can see here the parameters exceed considerably the last year's figures. For transit wagon, we can see the good dynamics regarding the decrease of empty or the increase of full carriages, but we can see the reasons of such positive dynamics in the next slide, and perhaps even the next. Right, this is the fleet of empty carriages, wagons, and they are split out at the sections of shared use and of specific use, individual use tracks, and the presence of empty wagons in the specific tracks is about 70,000 wagons without any operations carried out with them. About 500 train sets are located also as empty trains in the shared tracks or tracks of common use. So we analyze the reasons behind such situations and why this irrational situation occurs, and on our behalf we see that to some extent we are responsible for this, because we should optimize the schemes, the logistics, together with the operators, with our main partners, and together we are designing them for future. But as of today, unfortunately, this dialogue goes on not quite successfully because of the vested interests of every participant of such dialogue. But I hope that we will arrive at some sort of a consensus, because all of us are driven by the wish to minimize the number of empty cars. The idle time in the east, in the port of Vostochny, for example, so that we could take more cars westwards, we needed to use 23 different appointments. Well, you can understand that this was the destinations, the 23 destinations to which we rearranged these flows and avoided the pull-up of empty trains. But of course, this turnover of cars in this direction was a very keen problem, and we nevertheless came to a common solution with major operators. We have introduced the notion of a wagon which is unspecified and which can be used for a variety of different purposes, so that through this to take such unspecified cars westwards to Kuzbas, and this approach helps us to serve many different orders and to use them as the tool to minimize the empty miles and the idle time at stations, and to economize, which gives us a big effect economically over this small period since this decision was taken. And this is the period of from August this year. We have formed more than 600 such routes to different destinations, which cut down the turnover of open cars by 1.5 days in this section of the railways. In other routes, we also are introducing a similar approach, but this rigid approach which we manifest is connected with our inability to react in the right manner to the requests from different operators. For example, their requests to rearrange the wagon fleet for the sake of other routes apart from Siberian route. And for this, we would have needed to apply some solutions that will involve other technologies, but also the losses in operation of wagons. So that's why we are very stiff and we stick to the solution I mentioned. And with every operator, we work specifically looking for some strategies that will provide for economic effects. The situation is better in the transportation of construction materials, and technological effects allow in a more efficient way and more rational way to manage the fleet. And we can give many cases, and I think that the dialogue which we have built together with operators is sufficiently successful and can be multiplied in scope in different routes. What is the main conclusion, main message, is that we are all participants of the same situation in which we all together need to find solutions how to cut costs, to raise the efficiency, and this will be the win-win situation. Thank you very much.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you so much. Pavel, could you please tell us who initiated this kind of scheme with unspecified fleet? Maybe operators or consignors, or whose initiative was that? And will this practice be used widely? It is not related to the Federal Cargo Company, but this process involves 5 or 7 or maybe 9 main operator companies that work in this area. But the initiative, of course, was with us. And within a year, we've been discussing this topic, and finally this decision was made. And why was it made? Because everyone understands that there are too many wagons in the railway. And there are a lot of issues in the eastern direction, and it was discussed in the panel section and later. So infrastructural limitations are well known, and we need to avoid excessive numbers of wagons in the railway. So today we are trying to stick to the target parameters. Thank you. If for the whole year you've been discussing some issues, this means there were certain difficulties in these negotiations, and you being the initiator, what kind of difficulties was that, and how did you manage to overcome them to a certain extent? Because as I get it, unspecified wagons for an operator is not a simple story, and this means they lose some leverage of control, and from the business standpoint there are certain risks. Right, you are. And from the technological standpoint, everything is quite simple here. But from the business standpoint, operator's business, I mean, here there are certain disruptions, and I'm grateful to the colleagues from the operators community for finding some common grounds, finding mechanisms of financial interaction, because this freight basis becomes shared, but everyone's business is different, but finding a consensus is crucial. So I'm very grateful to our partners. So if I get it right, there's a certain message regarding this mechanism. So how widespread is it going to be? And what feedback might be there? Or perhaps you already have certain feedback because you said that up to 9 operators were involved, and how many freight owners are involved. As for the freight owners, I think there will be no full satisfaction ever. And volumes, it's more than 10% of volumes in the Far East compared to the last year. And it's not only about technology, we had certain initiatives to increase the throughput capacity of that. And as for the western area, this also includes seaports and those routes from there to Kuzbas. And now we have 17 destinations for open wagons. For example, in the entrance station, they handle those wagon flows and send them to the destinations. So we have 17 destinations. So this is additional handling through this technological scheme. Thank you so much. Viktor, a question to you. Being part of this mechanism and the only now general operator for the network, because you operate all types of wagons, and now we've been moving towards 2 general operators, but now you are alone, and probably this unspecified fleet. Was it easy for you, or perhaps not? And secondly, as for the wagon turnover, this is not probably the only one and the most efficient indicator for the operators. So in your hierarchy of indicators, where is it? And how you as operator harmonize with the client's expectations? Hello. Actually, being the only network operator left with our mother company, Russian Railways, since 2015, made our fleet unspecified, all of it, and Russian Railways can supply any wagon of ours for our orders. Just using this technology, we are winning at least a day in the turnover, which is good. As for the East Polygon, from our standpoint, we are always trying to save the limited resources. So if we have the throughput capacity that is limited, that's why this decision was made. If it hasn't been made, we would just transport less freight. So we don't have a lot of options. Either we move forward together or everyone just loses. So the majority of operators took this reasonable approach. Yes, we have to sacrifice something, but we will become more efficient and service our clients better. As for the wagon turnover, of course, operators have assets, that is wagons, that should run and earn money every day and per day, and multiplying this daily revenues by the number of wagons and adding the deadhead tariff, we obtain the overall tariff which we present to the client. When we undertake to provide other services. We, for example, found out that for pebbles, the freight owner wanted the wagons to be washed. For example, after transporting coal, we had to wash the wagons, then transport pebbles, then wash it again. So it was taking 2 days and maybe 3 days in winter. In 3 months, after calculating those costs and also environmental payments for those washings, we came to an understanding that we should do something to that. Because, for example, if the distance is not long, just about 600 kilometers, yes, we were receiving 100% deadhead tariff, and the deadhead ratio was not the best, but the efficiency of the fleet use was growing by 20% from the standpoint of the wagon turnover. And apart from the wagon turnover, we were saving the efforts of locos and stations, thus avoiding some useless work. And now if we consider the wagon turnover not as the ultimate target, but as part of the service we provide to the client, we can say that, looking at the graphs, we had a good turnover of the wagons in 2017, and all wagons were running and we had the deficit. But the question is, were freight owners happy with the rates, with tariffs, and with the lack of wagons? I think not. And so we come to the understanding that if we only struggle for some technological indicators, then our client probably won't be quite satisfied. And we understood that in our case, we need to have a certain backup of wagons in order to satisfy the needs of the clients who cannot have very precise planning, and sometimes they need 500 or 700 of additional wagons, and we need to react. If all of the wagons are running, the turnover is good, wagons are doing the job, but when the client needs additional wagons, we just say, I'm sorry, but no wagons. I think that this client, when we have proficit of wagons, they will find another operator, but I don't think he will be satisfied with how we did our job. So from our standpoint, it's nice when we as operators and Russian railways have some backup of locos and wagons to be flexible and agile. From the economical standpoint, it's probably not the best way, but it's better to have 100% of wagons running. But we are there for our clients, so we think that the main important point is to satisfy the needs of our client. And as for pricing, as Mr. Ivanov said, Yekaterinburg and Voinovka, there were a lot of deadhead wagons running from Sverdlovsk to Yekaterinburg railway, and the clients are just renting the wagons. And because after Voinovka, where can you go? Well, probably West Siberian road, but if they're delivering pebbles, they won't go there. So is it good for the railway? It's not the best solution. Actually, we also have such things when we travel from Sverdlovskaya to Kuibyshevskaya road to transport pebbles, and the client wants the wagon back, and this is a loaded destination, and we cannot insert empty wagons into a loaded train. And we explain the client, so if you are in the Kuibyshevskaya road, let us bring your wagons to the West Siberian road, because otherwise we'll have to bring it to Moscow and then back. So it is not right to use empty wagons when you have the lack of resources. our tariff policy is quite moderate, so we often have deficit of our wagons. For that, the easiest way is to take 2,000 wagons from the west and give it to the Krasnoyarsk road. This means 2,000 more wagons with coal going eastbound. So these disbalances are always present in the system, but you should look at it in a reasonable way. So we are not trying to win a certain indicator, but our main task is to deliver the freight, and we want the infrastructure to suit it, and we want the client to be happy. We want wagons to be innovative and modern. So we are always trying to find some mutually appropriate solutions, and we have the largest fleet in the world, and we can increase the throughput capacity by different ways, not only constructing freight yards and roads every time, but it's a matter of compromise, and it is a kind of art. Thank you so much. Indeed, that was a very right idea, that actually opposing some commercial indicators to technological indicators, this is artificial. Sometimes we see that something is very disbalanced. This makes us worry, but working with unspecified fleet, it's actually the most efficient way, because you can construct the railway, it's about infrastructure development, but ultimately you need to use the existing infrastructure in the most efficient way. And this solution will be more convenient for everyone. For those that bring freight back and forth, and for the Russian Railways company, and for the client, and for the carrier. So be that state budget, or be that Russian Railways investment budget. So financing of this whole thing anyway is the costs for the economy, and the more efficient way we use this infrastructure, the more attractive the tariffs will become. And now I would like to give the floor to Sergey Galkin for him to tell about that group of clients who are not easy to deal with, because we speak a lot about coal transportation and the key export freight now, and we speak a lot about containers, and we have also mineral and construction freight. And for Russian Railways, they form the balance, good balance of empty and loaded wagons for Russian Railways. And in this segment, the potential is just great to get the freight back for the railways, and also improve the efficiency of transportation, because compared to coal companies who can develop the infrastructure, manufacturers of mineral and construction materials, they are weaker, they are not so united, and working with them, Russian Railways and the largest operators have certain issues.
Thank you very much, dear participants. In continuation of the above said, I would give an example of our cooperation with the construction cargo. Loading of construction loads is loading the cargo for construction takes over 10% of the entire cargo volume for Russian Railways company, and this is a traditional situation. So it is a specific segment, and at some routes, for example, South Uralsk, it takes up to 1/3 of the entire volume of cargo, and in some other routes as well. So such specific cargo requires specific measures. This cargo is seasonal, and this also imposes the requirements to treat this cargo specifically. We have conducted analysis of the seasonality and also of the dynamics of loading this construction cargo over 9 months. We can see the fluctuations from September, and there is the decreasing trend from September to March, and the peak periods in summertime, which of course can be treated as the specific feature which we should consider in our management paradigms. And in this bottom part of the slide, you can see the whole of empty wagons, even not holes, but the idle time at stations. To decrease this parameter, perhaps could be associated with the rolling stock, which is requested for cargo carriage. So we need to balance the supply and demand on the idle and the number of applications for cargo transportation. What can we do? Carriage of construction cargo in terms of costs is one of the most complicated areas of management for the end user. And at peak times, it makes up to 65% of the overall costs of the cargo. And we understand that during the summer periods, when there is more intensity of wagon turnover and operators then wish to increase the prices for that period, and as a result, in summertime, there are ongoing bottlenecks in transportation of construction cargoes. We observe the dynamics at the top. This is for a couple of years, and since March, we keep track of all the peak periods, but now we see the correspondence of this to the program of improving the motor highways, which lags behind the set timelines, and as a result, during the first half of the year, we have carried over, and we failed to carry over 3 million tons, but also because of the geopolitical events that we have been discussing, in particular the decrease in coal transportation from the west. So this type of cargoes have been assisted by sending empty cars, but still we couldn't reach the figures of the previous year. And I think that the trend will continue. We understand that the owners of the rolling stock this year shows new trends, new interests, and this, of course, will reflect on rates increasing next year. And what we can suggest is that we should realize the problem of winter transportation, which is not a new approach. In Sverdlovsk and South Urals, to some extent, they have been using this since 2013. This approach has proved to be very positive, that through this winter intensity, they have released some wagons that can be forwarded to some other carriers, but also all the participants of and all the owners of the rolling stock and the storage houses, they all win through this approach, and we think that this approach should be studied in the more depth so that to the maximum use it and fill the gaps in other routes as well before the traditional seasonal peak starts. We understand that the funding of these national programs is not sufficient. We have only 52% of funds available in 2 programs, and we hope that within the remaining period of time the funds will be provided, because we think that the state should be interested in supporting us and supporting the consignors. In realization of this project, we find all the opportunities for the Russian Railways company to provide additional services for the benefit of better operation of express wagons, express trains, and also the loop route. And we hope that our ideas taken from here could be considered, and I'm ready to discuss it when needed. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, right now we are giving you the time to prepare your questions. In the end of our session, we'll have several minutes to ask questions to the colleagues from the Russian Railways company and other participants of this panel, but I'm giving the floor now to our colleague from Kazakhstan so that he would talk about experience of Kazakhstan in the methods of improving the efficiency of the carriages and wagons turnover. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to take part. The name of our session is called The Struggle for Carriage Turnover. I think that the struggle is the right word. And I would like also to remind you that in 1905, the academician Obraztsov, in one of his articles, wrote about theoretical background or foundations of mathematics calculations of or computations of carriage turnover. And this calculations, estimations following his model have been used widely and will be used widely. So when we speak about economic efficiency and technological efficiency, I wouldn't divide turnover into 2 categories. If we speak about better turnover, while it is decreasing the entire economic landscape, so that means that the turnover is not positive. And I agree, on the other hand, that technology, when we in business terms, of course, should be divided into work with deadheading and full wagons. And if we cannot manage both, but are successful only in loaded wagons, then we will never achieve success. So once again, we should manage successfully both the full wagons and the empty wagons. And I would like to focus in my presentation on one of the main parameters which today was mentioned when we were hearing about classical approach of defining stages of operation of wagons. And in this, there is one parameter which in future will reflect on the economy, and this is the speed of transportation. Normally we use this parameter only in relation to loaded wagons, but we suggest that in future, if we're interested in selling not tons per kilometer, but wagons and delivery time per kilometer and hours, then we will be interested in the speed of delivery. So in other words, we need to sell not tons per kilometer, but ton per kilometer per hour. So this parameter should be considered. In the first slide is the new future, which we are presenting as the model for the economic management. And from this point of view, Kazakhstan Railways can be a pilot, a pioneer, and we have a very firm standing that together with the Russian Federation and our cooperation, this will prove to be a beneficial approach. In this slide is the hierarchy of the structure of the new system that we are designing. In this, we consider the tons per kilometer per hour, and this is the new approach to pricing the tariffs, which will depend upon the speed of delivery and not just the distance covered by the cargo. And I would like in this slide to show that over 17 years we have performed in two ways. In blue, the classical conventional delivery with a conventional speed, but red is the fluctuation of delivery with different speed. So far we haven't analyzed in the in-depth manner how this can reflect on the operation, but I think that in future we will be more interested in this. And what I showed in the first slide here is specified. So about 10 kilometers per hour is the average speed of delivery, and the remaining, which is the 15, is the speed of the movement of wagons during the technical stations. And you see that the speed changes whether the station is for technical maintenance or the station of delivery. So in 2018, the average parameter was at the level of over 44% of our rolling stock of wagons was mostly on the technical stations, and 27 were at in this section, at the hall. And the initial speed parameter was shown previously, and now I would like to show how it will look like if we calculate tons per wagon per day. So the daily performance of a wagon. We took the data for the period from 2002 to 2018. So how many tons was carried per wagon per day. So tons are small here, but that's for calculation purposes. And you can see that it all depends on the speed. So the efficiency depends on the speed, and the ratio of efficiency of varies from 0 to 1, which is the period of haul. So once again, we can see that the delivery will correspond to what I have heard in previous presentations. Normally,
we have the inventory fleet with our daughter company, Temirtrans, and since 2017, from 2014, we had 365 days, which we divided and looked at the fleet. There are more than 55,000 wagons, and the rate between delivery speed is quite high. So when the delivery speed was reaching 9 kilometers per hour as average, this company provided for 73 transportations, 73% of transportation. You see different types of freight here. We expected these indicators to be higher, but anyway, in Kazakhstan Railways, this fleet plays the main role. And now, if we speak about the transport unit, when we take ton, weight and speed, and if hourly work, if we introduce this hourly work, so how much work is performed in an hour, and we'll see the transport capacity of the network. And we took the operational fleet and we performed a survey, a research, and we found this core, and as Pavel said, a pool of fleet pool of wagons, which is 57,000 wagons. This is the fleet that Kazakhstan Railroads has, and in summer it's growing, and in autumn and winter it decreases. And for Kazakhstan, grain is very important, coal is very important in autumn, and they can be up to 80 and 90,000 wagons. And in 2014, so we did what? We had different residents, and if the wagon crossed the border, we were accounting them and including them. There were Russian wagons and Kazakhstan wagons and wagons from other neighboring countries, and we found out this 576 in our report. This is the number of days for the average wagon turnover, and we're just hiding this indicator. We are showing it in a different way. In Russian Railways, as I see it, it's 15-16 days, and here we have 12 days. The real wagon turnover, actual wagon turnover, and it's not far from Russian Railways. These figures are similar. The problem is that when we started hiding or avoiding this indicator, this inflicts a lot of other problems. And eventually it involves the profitability of the state company and the revenues of the wagon owners and issues of freight owners. And now is going to be probably the last slide. If we did this kind of report after 2018, we used this sixth column, and here you see the potential, and we found out that in Kazakhstan now about 49% of the fleet is not used efficiently. In other words, 51,000 wagons are running through the network with no use, and they belong to the state or they belong to private owners. So these are the conclusions we made, and the tolerance is less than 1% here. And such indicators, such outcomes for us are very bad, of course. And I just wanted to get back to our topic. And once again, I would like to reiterate that this session is called Struggle. And I completely agree that it is a real struggle, but if we overcome it, we'll be able to have very good results. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a very interesting input and conclusions. And now, to finalize our session from the presenter's standpoint, I would like to address the issue of locations for loading and unloading. I mean work in the tracks and in the stations that are not shared, that are not of common use. And there we have a black swan that flew in and declared that those maneuvering fleet that is used and this quality of repairs and renovation does not correspond the requirements of the new technical regulations of the customs union. So now it seems to me that the topic of bearings attracted the main focus, and perhaps other issues related to the technical condition of the rolling stock and traction stock, they were moved aside. But it seems to me it is not right, because actually if the situation with the maneuvering fleet is not resolved, all the efforts made by the operators and freight owners and Russian railways, they will just be in vain, because freight will just circulate and get stuck in the non-shared infrastructure, and perhaps will reduce the downtime of wagons in certain sections of the network, but the wagons will have to spend more time in loading and unloading areas. So we probably need some basic solution. And we cannot buy a lot of new locos to tackle that. So it is very interesting if there are solutions that could allow preventive measures in this field. And I would like to give the floor to Yury Sunyaev. And they actually offer one of such solutions, and perhaps this solution could become one of the important elements. Getting back to the topic, so the topic is struggle. Probably this struggle could be a success. Hello, thank you. I've been listening to my colleagues, and I see that the carriage wagon turnover really depends on the right management in the network and interaction with the client, with consignors. So you can pay more attention to the locomotive's work. And here we analyzed the fleet of locomotive fleet, and we saw that in large enterprises, factories, the backup capacity is up to 20%, which means that bear in mind that every fifth loco can break at any moment. So they always keep certain number of locos to provide for timely deliveries of the freight. As for the financing problem and replacement of locos, now we offer to the market something which is not new in the world, but it's new for Russia. That's long-term rent, which includes full service of the loco throughout its life cycle, and it will allow you to use these locos in long and short distances. And our main office involves all the resources to upgrade the existing fleet according with the client's demand. Russian Railway, our large client, provides for replacement of the fleet, but according to our data, in 3-4 years, private industrial operators will face a very serious issue, because the fleet, according to the documents and also in accordance with their actual wear and tear, will be worn out, and perhaps to 90%. So according to the documents, this figure probably is lower, but no loco can run for more than 90 years. So you will have to look at the costs related to maintaining this loco, and these are huge funds that are frozen with the companies, because many companies do not really use locos for anything except for moving wagons. So as for wagon turnover, it really depends on shunting locos. Thanks a lot, dear colleagues. So we are almost done, and now I'm happy to give the floor to the audience. So if you have questions to the panel members, please raise your hand and you will be handed a microphone. So accordingly, you will be able to get the answers. Any questions from the audience? I don't see any. So then, from my part, I would like to ask Pavel regarding this question, this issue that was outlined by Yury as for the condition of locomotives. How Russian railways feel it? Do you feel any tensions with this locomotive fleet? Perhaps something's already changed. Do you plan to do something to improve your locomotive fleet? So perhaps this could be a solution. So we do not see any issues with the shunting fleet, and with such volumes of loading and unloading, we need to have excessive backup. As for private operators, I don't see any issue here. If they need to replace the locomotives, you can order them with our manufacturers, and their capacity is quite satisfying. Thank you. Sergey, would you add something? Do you agree? Well, it's not the first time of such interest to this issue, and we always consider the possibility for our consignors and how their demands are satisfied with traction. So of course we need to take this opinion into account, because they analyzed the situation, and at least Russian railways are always ready to provide backup with their locomotives. But I think that good managers can predict this situation, and they will be able to have enough locomotives. And also a question to Viktor. As far as I see, one of the new areas for the Federal Cargo Company is the work in non-common tracks and interaction with the freight owners there. Do you plan to have your own fleet of shunting locos? Are you already renting them for your clients? So what do you plan in this area? Actually, we were renting locomotives, and this year we will buy 14 new locomotives, modern ones. But here it's the question of economy. Yes, this ratio of technical preparedness, and there are certain areas where we need more locomotives, and buying one modern loco instead of 3 worn locos is much better and more efficient. And what about your clients? Are they now ready for getting this integrated service? And in what industries do you feel the demand of your clients? You know, perhaps large companies, coal companies and metallurgical companies with a well-developed infrastructure of their own, they will come to us as their last resort. But the companies that have old fleet of locomotives, and this fleet has been already running beyond their deadlines and shelf life. They have no money to maintain their own tracks. So those companies are perhaps our future clients. These are medium-sized companies with 2,000 wagons loaded per month. So probably this is the main segment. And mostly these are manufacturers of mineral and construction freight. Thanks a lot, dear colleagues. And finalizing our session, I would like to invite Mikhail Leodernoldi to come up to this stage to make the presentation or announcement of the forum in Vienna on the 26th, 27th March next year. Please, you have the floor.
I'm pleased to announce that the second International Railway Congress will be held on 26th and 27th March 2020 in Vienna, Austria. We are happy to welcome 600 high-level experts. International top speakers will debate and discuss current and future challenges facing rail transportation, as well as fostering sustainable development and emerging technologies.
Thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, as a partner of GUDOC and PBV, I'm pleased to announce the next International Rail Congress. The man you have seen here announcing it is our Minister of Transport and Technology, and we invite you to come to Vienna in March, the 26th and 27th of March. What is the Congress, actually? As you heard, here we put together a quite nice panel with policymakers, industry, operators, and railway companies. We expect 50 plus countries to attend, 250 companies, more than 600 participants, and 40 plus speakers. We are happy to invite you also to the Gala Dinner, which is an exceptional event of the Congress. We have 6 panels, over 100 media releases, and 10 plus MOUs expected to sign. Railway must play a decisive role in developing the future. Railway is actually the answer to our CO2 problems. So bringing together policymakers and industry to guide the new rules to fasten the processes of developing railways and to fasten the routes actually between Asia and Europe is our decisive target. So please be welcome in Vienna in March. Thank you.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. In conclusion of our discussion session, I would like to thank you and say see you next year in Sochi.